Okay. So I remind myself to explain these teachings, or to teach tonight with a good motivation, a motivation that is wanting to benefit you, the listeners. And then I'll remind you also to listen with that same attitude of wanting to benefit yourself and all beings by absorbing these teachings and carrying them out as best you can in all of your activities of this life. So where we stand now, having reflected on the benefits of bodhicitta through the advice given in the first chapter, and appreciating through our own study of that chapter how the most noble mind, the most noble attitude, or the most noble mind, let's put it that way, is the bodhicitta. And understanding that bodhicitta has different aspects. We can say that there's 3 aspects of bodhicitta that we are striving for, are striving to train in and perfect. Is the bodhicitta as aspiration, bodhicitta as engaging activity, and bodhicitta as the ultimate truth, absolute bodhicitta. So there's 2 relative aspects of bodhicitta, and one is absolute bodhicitta. And again, maybe it's the good fortune of our karma to hear about bodhicitta, to hear about compassion and emptiness and non-duality. That may be the momentum or the seeds ripening from our past association with those who teach or exemplify bodhicitta. But then now it's kind of landed in our lap, and then we need to reflect on it and consider the benefits and the excellence of bodhicitta and how worthy it is of our attention and our as a goal, something that that's worth striving for. We should know that, just like we would know whether or not, I don't know, if we buy a car, then we would research what kind of a car would suit our needs, and be within our reach. And then we'd also need to know where to buy it. And once we've put all those factors together, then we go with the assurance that we will get what we want, what car we want. And so there is some work to be done. There is some examination and analysis that we do need to perform. Even though we may be initially inspired by bodhicitta or by the great masters who are examples and exemplify that quality of mind, but still in our own experience, we do need to reflect again and again on the benefits of bodhicitta, and also the once we've taken and made that same pledge, the pledge that all Buddhas and Bodhisattvas have taken in the past, then we also need to reflect on the disadvantages of losing it. Because even though we take that vow to bring all beings onto the path of liberation and escort them to their own release from samsara, I don't know, when we when we sober up from having taken that vow, we're faced with our own limitations and our own emotional habits and mental habits that are probably almost diametrically opposed to the accomplishment of that vow. So the 4th and 5th and 6th chapters are taught, Shantideva taught, as a way of addressing those limitations and counteracting them, again, by using our ability to analyze and to examine, to reflect, and then to draw conclusions, and then put those conclusions into, to implement, to put them into use, to integrate those conclusions into our minds, So we already went through the 4th chapter of that is a chapter on being cautious or heedful, and then now the next chapter is called here it's called vigilant introspection, or just introspection. And these 3 chapters, or these 2 chapters taken together, include the 3 practices, of carefulness or heedfulness. I think I like heedfulness best. We could say heedfulness or attentiveness or conscientiousness. But heedfulness, and then in this chapter, the topic is alertness or introspection, introspection or alertness, and mindfulness. And so it will be helpful, not helpful, it's important that we distinguish between the topic, say, of the previous chapter, heedfulness. What is it called? Carefulness. Okay. Heedfulness. I like heedfulness. It's being careful and also and careful. But anyway, then the introspection and then the mindfulness. Heedfulness is like what we discussed previously in the 4th chapter. Is a heedfulness is a mental occurrence that causes our mind to take care about what it is doing regarding, particularly what it is doing regarding whether or not it is abandoning what is counterproductive to upholding this bodhisattva vow, this bodhicitta vow, or whether it is something that will that we should adopt. In other words, it's a carefulness of that mind is careful about what it should do and what it shouldn't do in regard to upholding or developing or training in this bodhicitta. And the result of that carefulness is what we might say is progress on the path of awakening. Of course, the implication is, or the prerequisite to that is that we need to know what to abandon and what to adopt. Yeah, and so for that, then we need to take teachings on the say the 10 categories of non-virtue, the 10 categories of virtue, the precepts of refuge. Once you take refuge, what are the precepts of refuge, and what are the precepts of the bodhicitta vow? So those are the base. That's that we need to know. Then we know what to be cautious about, whether or not we are abandoning and adopting those factors that will promote bodhicitta, promote our training in bodhicitta. Alertness or introspection, which is this chapter, is also a mental event. It's a mental event that functions as vigilance or watchfulness, so that the mind, basically, it's a watchfulness so that the mind knows what it is doing. It's being aware. It's not just being aware, but it's being aware while examining. And then mindfulness, which is a very commonly used term in all the schools of Buddhism. Mindfulness here particularly mindfulness means that mindfulness holds the mind in place. It's kind of a holding quality of mind. It holds the mind in place. So that when, for instance, when you are practicing, say, of course here, what's being held in place are the precepts, the training, the quality, the precepts of the Bodhisattva vow and the refuge vow and the vows of or the 10 classes of negative and positive actions. It's being mindful of those in the mind, whether the mind is engaging in those or whether the mind isn't engaging in those, and holding that mind to that engagement. And when that mindfulness is lost, or when that mindfulness gets kind of weak or vague, then it's introspection, alertness that informs the mind, that knows this, that knows that mindfulness is weak or is absent, that now you're totally thinking of something else. It's that alertness is what informs the mind to tighten up mindfulness, or to reassert mindfulness. So mindfulness is, the word itself has to do with memory. It means remembering. It means remembering what's to be done and remembering what's not to be done. So if you're on the Bodhisattva path, then there are certain things that we need to remember, right? Like what will destroy the downfalls of our vow, what will interrupt or corrupt or degenerate our bodhisattva, our bodhicitta vows, the precepts and so forth, engaging bodhicitta and aspiration bodhicitta, and a refuge, all of the vows we have. And even if you're if you've been introduced to and use the 7-point mind training as a vehicle for training the mind in bodhicitta, then there are the sixth point of the 7 points is the discipline. And so there's 18 different precepts in that point that we need to know. And so being mindful means to be aware of how the mind is doing with those. Okay. So, and of course with mindfulness, whether it's used in this context or whether it's used, say, to develop shamatha, it's mindfulness combined with or partnering up with awareness that enables one to achieve the benefits of shamatha practice. Of course, the first aspect, or the first way to train in mindfulness is to become familiar. It's called familiarization. Getting accustomed to something. So that means learning something about what your mind is holding to. Again, whether it's vows or whether it's some object of meditation, then you have to gain some familiarity with that object in order to develop mindfulness. And also, when we have developed mindfulness with regard to vows or with the precepts, conduct, and our emotional life, and our thoughts and our emotions, that relationship, when we develop mindfulness of that, then we develop, things become more, as we become accustomed to mindfulness of those, then they become not forgotten. And as they become not forgotten, then they become, or that mindfulness becomes less, it becomes less dispersed, or we don't get so distracted. And we develop, in this case, we could say, a real moral compass. Okay, so it's good to kind of review and to understand the distinctions and the place that these three terms have at this juncture in the training. And this introspection particularly is critical, because that's the function of our mind that is always aware of what's going on. So it has a much more broader scope, almost like awareness of a kind of a panoramic awareness of body, speech, and mind. It's like when you're driving, if you're only mindful of your hands on the steering wheel and the forward, the direction you're going, you know where you're going, and that's all you're thinking about, then you can, you have to be able to be aware of right side or left side, signs, people, traffic. There's many things, so you need to have that kind of alertness to many different aspects. So it's like that, it's slightly more panoramic. And of course, here in the teachings, Shantideva, his emphasis or his advice is we have to maintain this introspective awareness, this awareness of what our body's doing, what our speech is doing, and what our mind is doing at all times. What is it thinking? What am I feeling? How am I reacting to this situation? How am I reacting to that situation? Am I elated? Am I depressed? How am I relating to this elation and to this depression? How am I relating to this and that? So there's always this intelligent watcher. And again, first we have to learn what it is that we should be doing and what it is we shouldn't doing that will enhance our bodhicitta, our training, and what will detract from it. So in the first verse, he says here, those who wish to keep the trainings, which means we have to know what the trainings are, must with perfect self-possession guard their minds. So here, like in the, without this guard upon the mind, the trainings cannot be preserved. So here, in the commentary, he discusses how basically once we've heard the teachings on what to do and what not to do, for instance, we've heard the disadvantages of, say, the 10 non-virtuous actions of body, speech, and mind, killing, stealing, and so forth. And then we've heard the advantages of the 10 virtuous 10 aspects of, or 10 kinds of virtuous activity, physical, verbal, and mental. So when we've learned those things, then it's up to us. It's up to us to guard our own mind, because we're the only ones who know what's going on in our minds. And if somebody tries to correct us, that may not work. We may actually get irritated and angry at them and become more entrenched. And so we can't rely on others. Of course, others don't even know what's going on in our minds. So we must be introspective here. We must be watchful of our own body, speech, and mind, because we're the ones that will listen to. How do I say that? When we know what it is that we should adopt and what it is we should avoid, when we know those things and we feel ourselves involved in something that we should avoid, we are the ones who will know that. We're the ones who, through mindfulness and introspection and heedfulness, will be able to avoid what should be avoided. And we should know whether or not our mind is practicing, say, generosity. And we'll know the extent of our stinginess. And so we will chastise or correct ourselves. That is the effective way that we need to approach this. We need to do that and recognize re-enter the right path and do so joyfully. Be joyful at being able to notice what we should avoid. And so with that knowledge and that joy, then it's very easy then to move from a negative mindset or mind attitude or speech, and correct and reconfigure basically our approach and our reactions. And I think the message here is we have to be our own teacher. The metaphor that's used here is that the mind is like a wild horse, and that mindfulness is like the reins. Mindfulness is like the bit and the reins. And introspection is like the one who's holding the reins, the watcher, the actor. And so that these things of what to avoid and what to adopt can't be relegated to be external rules. I don't think when Buddha taught all of the Vinaya and all the rules, what seemed like rules, it was advice. that came through his understanding of karma, cause and effect, and assuming that an individual wants comfort and happiness and peace of mind, then certain body, speech, and mind actions will lead to that, undeniably, or absolutely lead to that. And certain mental, certain thoughts, certain emotions, certain speech, and certain actions will lead to suffering. And it's up to the individual to adopt or to deny. They're not external rules that have to be, that we strap ourselves on with. So it's really, that's why this introspection is so kind of so beautiful in a way, because nobody else is looking at our mind except oneself, except us, you, the individual. And if we don't protect our minds with these three mental functions, then the trainings cannot be preserved, as it says here. By these trainings, we mean discipline and samadhi, meditation, and wisdom, prajna. Like these are the three higher trainings: morality or discipline, meditation, and prajna, wisdom. And the whole process of the path of the Bodhisattva path is one of training in these three aspects. Okay, so the way this chapter is, and also I should mention also, just as a sort of this general discussion of this chapter, all of the advice and all of the what to adopt and what to avoid, and all the precepts and the 18 root downfalls, the 18 Lojong precepts, the 10 non-virtuous, 10 virtuous, all these disciplines are what could be called like to conform or to adopt or to conform to these it's called in Buddhism, it's called the natural law. It's the natural law. All these actions to avoid and all these actions to adopt are according to the natural law, which means they are all in harmony with and promote coming to realize the nature of reality. So they're natural law, they're natural in that they, by natural we mean the nature of mind, the nature of reality. The natural way that the mind abides. When the mind splits into duality, subject and object, that's not natural. So the way this chapter, the way that this chapter is presents this topic, again, Shantideva is always very thorough about using our sort of cognitive ability, or our ability to analyze as a way of empowering our conclusions. And I think this seems to be the Buddhist approach. Anything we do, whether it's like when you read the teachings, the Mahayana teachings on the six perfections of, say, generosity or discipline, is always starts off with, well, the advantages of generosity, or the advantages of patience. The disadvantages of not being generous are this. The disadvantages of not being patient are this. I think this is always there. So we should always make use of that approach. Just like we do when we, buy or when you put something in your body, when you eat something. It seems like because of the abundance of choices, that ability to benefits and disadvantages and advantages is almost it's the burden. It's a big burden right now. Because we have that ability to discern based on analysis, and you're standing there reading all these things, trying to remember what these names mean, whether or not you fall into the category that should eat that or shouldn't eat that, or this or that or the other thing. And so we should use that on something as meaningful. We should use our ability to decide based on analyses something about when it comes to training in bodhicitta. Because if we're not training in bodhicitta, we're training in something else. So the more we appreciate the excellence and the benefits of bodhicitta, the more our mind will become led towards developing bodhicitta. And the more we understand the disadvantages of indulging in, say, negative emotions, then gradually we'll migrate away from our negative emotions. And then you add in kind of the profundity of meditation, and then that same tendency, or that same introspection and carefulness becomes more and more the object of those of that introspection and mindfulness and heedfulness. The object becomes more and more subtle, more and more subtle. So first, Shantideva discusses how all harm comes from the mind. Basically, this chapter is really emphasizing the importance of the mind. And then after that is how all virtue comes from the mind. And then the need to keep watch over that mind. And then I think the bulk of the chapter has to do with how to watch the mind, how to keep watch over the mind. Okay. So first, let's see, the second, third, fourth, so the first 8 up to the 8th, the second to the 8th verses have to do with how all harm comes from the mind. Wondering wandering where it will, the elephant of mind will bring us down to torment in the hell of unrelenting pain. No worldly beast, however wild and crazed, could bring upon us such calamities. So here he equates, of course, the mind to a wild elephant, meaning that our mind really just follows its habitual patterns of the past, and it invites, future thoughts and present thoughts, and we wander just willy-nilly from object and circumstances to another object and circumstances. And probably if I asked you, or if I even ask myself, okay, what thoughts have you had over the last couple of hours? How many thoughts you could identify that you had? Because it's just like an intoxicated, in the commentary, he says during Shantideva's time, one of the weapons that were used by armies were elephants, and they would get them drunk. They'd feed them, they'd get them to drink intoxicating, something that would intoxicate them, maybe alcohol or something. And then they just point them in the direction of the village, and they would just rampage through the village and destroy everything that was in its path. And they'd send a whole herd of drunk elephants in. And then the army would just come in and sweep up. And so he was kind of equating that to our mind. And even though elephants can trample people and kill people, but the intoxicated elephant of our mind is much worse. Our mind will cause us to suffer for a long time, many lifetimes. And no, as you say, no worldly beast, nothing in the world, no enemy could ever bring upon us such calamities as our mind does. Our mind is sort of our number one enemy. We talked about that. He talked about that at length in the last chapter. Then, if with mindfulness's rope, the elephant of mind is tethered all around, our fears will come to nothing. Every virtue drop into our hands. So if, again, here mindfulness as being the metaphor of the reins or a rope, if we tie our mind, so to speak, if we become mindful to the virtue of compassion, the virtue of wisdom, and if we tie the rope of mindfulness to that tree of virtue of those qualities, then we'll have nothing. Nothing will cause us to suffer, and all virtue will be accomplished if we are mindful of things such as compassion and wisdom, and giving up, allowing our attachment to negative thoughts of the past, negative actions, past enemies. What do you say? Harm done or hurtful things done by others in the past, and plotting future harm to others, but just staying with the present thoughts on virtue and just being mindful of your present virtuous state of mind, that develops into fearlessness and creates the causes of everything that we aspire to, all the peace and clarity of our mind. Tigers, lions, elephants, bears, snakes, every hostile foe, those who guard the prisoners in hell, ghosts and ghouls, and every evil wraith, by simple binding of his mind alone, that is to say, by maintaining mindfulness. And of course, mindfulness isn't like a rope, really like a rope that you just tie to a tree or a pole, because mindfulness is a mental operation. It's a mental event, and it needs to be extended. Mindful for 3 seconds, then 5 seconds, then 10 seconds, then 15 seconds, then 20 seconds, 30 seconds, and so on. We have to train it like that. By simple binding of this mind alone, all these things are likewise bound. That is to say, all these sort of things that maybe during Shantideva's time, ghosts, ghouls, elephants, bears, all these things will be tamed. If we tame our mind, then all these things will be tamed. And we tame our mind by loving kindness, bodhicitta, compassion, meditation, shamatha, vipassana meditation, all these tamings of this mind, then none of these things can harm us. We will be we could say we're accompanied by natural protective forces. For all anxiety and fear and pain in boundless quantity, their source and wellspring is the mind itself, as he who spoke the truth declared. I guess as Buddha said, that pain and anxiety and fear and so forth, their source is the mind. That is to say, a mind that's fallen under the power of distractions and delusions. That mind is the most dangerous of all the enemies that we could have. So the point is to point out how to, we must control our mind, we must tame our mind. If we can tame our mind or bring our mind under our power, then all phenomena everything depends on the mind. Phenomena arise in dependence upon the mind. And so when our mind is tamed, then everything that arises from that mind is tamed. Everything depends on the mind. And our mind is untamed because of distractions and delusion. Distractions have to do with sense objects. Being distracted means that your mind goes out through the avenues of perception to a sense object. And as it fixates on that sense object, then it falls under the delusion of that sense object by the arising of the kleshas, of the afflictions, attachment or aversion or whatever of the afflictions. And mistakes occur. So delusion implies sort of, there's that sense in the word of that's a delusion, that delusion isn't just delusion, but it's action that comes from delusion as well. So it's a delusion is based on a mistake, and it creates a mistake. And so that is that's why in the 6th verse he says, all anxiety and fear and pain, the source is the mind itself. It's that kind of a mind. Of course, we're the absence of delusion, the absence of distraction is the presence of peace and contentment and clarity. And when there is clarity, as we mentioned last year, when the mind is clear and pure in a sense, then that's the mind that embraces bodhicitta. That's the mind that bodhicitta takes root in. So we want to, through introspection and noticing our minds and noticing whether it's engaging in noticing what body, speech, and mind are doing, and making the choices based on that, then our mind becomes more sort of drenched or submerged or absorbed in this compassion and commitment to enlightenment, to wisdom. The hellish instruments to torture living beings, who invented them for such intent? Like who put all these people there to harm me? Who forged this burning iron ground? These are kind of based on the conception of the hell realms, or the different hell realms. Whence have all these demon women sprung? This specifically means women or men, those who we sought out through a desire, through sexual attraction. That when in the hell realm, if we wind up in the hell realm, then there's they change. We see them at the top of the hill as we envision them and are attracted to them, and then we run up, and then they change to demons, and then they torture us and consume us. And then again, we wake up and see them at the bottom of the hill, and down we go to the bottom of the hill with great sexual appetite, and then find them having changed into a demoness or a demon. So this kind of thing goes on and on, again and again and again. And all are but the offspring of the sinful mind. This the mighty sage has said. Throughout the triple world, therefore, there is no greater bane than mind itself. So all these are but all these agents of harm. Basically, all these are projections, or the personifications of, say, in this case, if we talk about the hell realms, they are the expression or the personification of anger and rage combined with harmful or commensurate negative actions, harmful actions. And so the result is the feeling and the perception that you are being tortured and driven by these hell beings. But they all are just the agents of our karma. Like we create good karma, and then we experience happiness, and that happiness is kind of delivered to us by sunsets, by friendly people, by nutritive food. Those are all of the delivery system for our virtuous actions. And likewise, or then negative actions or unvirtue, the results of that are delivered by the agents. And so those are all just projections of our karma. It's a closed loop. We make, we experience, and we project the milieu of that experience, including like if we conceive of ourselves as a being, then we project beings who deliver that to us. Who invented them for such intent to harm me? So these are all this sinful mind. It means the habitual power of one's own negative mind, the habitual power of negativity. So there's nothing to fear, there's nothing to be anxious about except one's own mind's mental projections, one's own mind's negative projections. Even in the hell realms, it's taught here, even in the hell realms, if you recognize everything that's occurring as just the projection of your own mind, then you're liberated. Just like if you dream, when you dream and you're having a nightmare, if you recognize that the objects that are terrifying you are just a dream, you no longer have fear, even if the dream continues. So therefore, then there's no greater bane than mind itself. I guess I didn't think to look up bane. That's not exactly a colloquial English word that's used very much, but must have something to do with being a problem. So the advice is then, if that is when we come to terms with that and accept these, reflect on these verses and consider and contemplate the intention of these verses, then we should, and this will then inspire or impel us to guard our mind from slipping under the power of delusion and distractions. Because it's through those that all harm is, or by not coming under the power of the mind's delusions, then all harm both now and in the future, ceases. So then, next section, from 9 on to the next page, it's that the topic is how all virtue comes from mind. And he's taking each of the six paramitas as being the virtue. Where he says, if transcendent giving is to dissipate the poverty of beings, in what way, since the poor are always with us, have former Buddhas practiced it? Transcendent giving, so the teachings say, consists in the intention to bestow on every being all one owns, together with the fruits of such a gift. It is indeed a matter of the mind itself. So, of course, Shantideva, of course, he is presenting here in this text a synthesis of his extensive understanding and familiarity with the entire teachings of Buddha. And so he's asserting here, or assuring, that according to the teachings, if the Buddha, who had perfected generosity, if he perfected generosity, then how do we explain that everyone isn't free of want? If generosity is to give to relieve suffering, then you would think that then once everyone is relieved of suffering, then generosity is accomplished and perfected. But he's rather telling us that transcendent giving isn't judged by how many and how vast your giving is, but it has to do with the mind that intends, that has brought to fulfillment the intention to give everything one owns to all beings without considering the karmic benefit of it or any karmic fruits, the fruits of that virtue, without considering, or without, without being limited in your giving by the concept of a self, of a giver, by the concept of a recipient, and by the concept of an act of giving. It's giving that's not bound by those three spheres, what are called the three spheres, Korsum. That's transcendent giving. Therefore, transcendent giving has to do with mind. Giving, generosity is carried out and perfected in the mind. And similarly, then, the next 11th verse is about discipline. Where could beings, fishes, and the rest be placed to keep them safe from being killed? Deciding to refrain from every harmful act is said to be transcendent discipline. So here, like, if, of course, the epitome or the primary discipline is to not harm. And so you might think that then perfect discipline would be when the occasion arose when no being was harmed. You would say that the discipline of non-harming would be perfected. But again, he's saying here, it has to do with a mind that is that no longer has the intention to harm. Then that harmlessness or that discipline is perfected. When there's no concept of someone who is refraining from harm, that there is no act that's being refrained from, and that there is no subject, no object, that is being harmed. That is, when those are transcended, then that is the perfection or the paramita of discipline. And patience. Harmful beings are everywhere like space itself. Impossible it is that all should be suppressed, but let this angry mind alone be overthrown, and it's as though all foes had been subdued. So anywhere we go, if there's a sentient being there, then that sentient being is afflicted by desire and attachment, by preference, by aversion, by anger or hostility or fear or ignorance. Any sentient being, no matter how, if we go out like in our next planet, when we start migrating to other planets in the solar system or beyond, then if we find sentient beings there besides ourselves, then they'll also, if they're sentient beings, if they are beings that have a mind and that they haven't attained awakening from the duality of that mind, then they will have afflictions also, and they will be jealous of each other, and they will be envious of each other. They will be afraid of each other, and this and that. And so being patient isn't perfected when everybody gets along and nobody has any ill intent. But it's when one overcomes anger and replaces it with the qualities of the bodhicitta, then patience is perfected. To cover all the earth with sheets of leather, where could such amounts of skin be found? But with the leather soles of just my shoes, it's as though I cover all the earth. So that's a very familiar phrase, isn't it? Or a familiar metaphor. That if you want to cross a thorny plain, then one way would be to cover it with leather or with asphalt. And then you could walk or drive, or you wouldn't have any problems, or you wouldn't have any irritation. But just putting the leather on, just putting shoes on and walking, it's the same. You can go anywhere. And thus the outer course of things I myself cannot restrain, but let me just restrain my mind and what is left to be restrained. So these three verses have to do with patience, showing that the paramita of patience, the perfection of shanti, of patience, comes from the mind, one's mind. And then in 15, diligence a clear intent can fructify and bring us birth in such as Brahma's realm. The acts of body and of speech are less. They do not generate a like result. So here is a clear intent. This intention can, like the example or the path that's he's talking here has to do with training in loving kindness. And by training the birth in that loving kindness, which is that pure, beautiful intention that may all beings have happiness and the cause of happiness, and may they be free from suffering and the cause of suffering. And if we have that intention and the joy of that and the equanimity of that, then a person could be born in Brahma's realm. But physical actions and verbal actions, they have results, like a virtuous speech, not engaging in lying, but being honest, and not engaging in gossip, but speaking in meaningful and appropriate times and ways, and not being divisive, but rather speaking in ways that promote accord and harmony, and all these physical actions of benefiting, they will be produce virtuous experiences, but nothing like the experience of training the mind in loving kindness. And so here this shows that intention is of diligence, it's based on the mind. That the mind is the greatest factor, and speech and body or physical actions are weaker. And then in verse 16 has to do with meditation or concentration, the perfect paramita of concentration or mental stability or meditation, we could say. Recitations and austerities, long though they may prove to be, if practiced with distracted mind, are futile. So the knower of reality has said. So if mind is distracted by then there won't be any results. If you're doing mantras and carrying out various austerities and things, or reciting prayers and so forth, if you're thinking of something completely different, which is easy to do, maybe you've experienced that from time to time, then it's no use. It's really about the mind staying focused. That is the mark of a paramita, not in the numbers of things we do or the length of time we spent in retreat or meditating, but it has to do with how our mind has been undistracted. That is the mark of the perfection of meditation. So that has to do with, again, comes from the mind. That virtue of that paramita comes from the mind. And then wisdom is the 17th verse, the 6th of the perfections, prajna, sublime knowing, we say. All those who fail to understand the secret of the mind, the greatest of all things, although they wish for joy and sorrow's end, will wander to no purpose uselessly. So all those who, as long as we don't realize that mind is empty and mind if we don't realize the non-self of mind, and that mind, we don't realize mind's luminosity, then the secret of the mind, which means that, that has a lot of different meanings, but most conventional way to understand mind as being a secret is that everyone has a mind, but no one, hardly anyone, realizes the nature of that mind. It's a secret. We have a mind, and it's hiding itself. It's a secret to us. And even though we don't realize our mind's nature, then we have this aspiration for happiness. We do things to promote our happiness, to protect us from suffering and so forth. But at the end of the day, if we don't realize our mind, it's no use. We'll still wander in the future, sort of from in samsara, kind of miserable. So again, this has to do with wisdom, the wisdom of non-self, the wisdom of shunyata, the inseparable emptiness and luminosity of mind's nature. That is, of course, the virtue of the prajnaparamita, and it has to do with mind, but that virtue also comes from the mind. So to sum up, all bodhisattva activity, all training in bodhicitta is founded on the mind. And so then Shantideva goes on to say, therefore, that's good. You notice that Shantideva, he presents the pros and cons, and then he says, therefore, so he's drawing conclusions. And if there's one thing we can learn from this way Shantideva presents these things, is that we should draw conclusions. If you are, if you're contemplating the four thoughts that turn the mind, you should, at the end, say, therefore, or draw conclusions. Okay, then, what is my action item coming from what I've just been contemplating? What am I going to do? What should I be doing? And then kind of throw yourself into your own future based on your intelligence and your ability to understand the difference between what's beneficial and what's detrimental. That probably is one of the qualities of the precious human birth. Maybe when it says maybe all our senses are intact or something along those lines, where we have the cognitive ability to analyze and then draw conclusions and then make effort in following those conclusions. And as we know, just from studying history and other things, that's not everyone's inheritance. Okay, anyway, I won't go there. But anyway, therefore, I will take in hand and will protect this mind of mine, the source of all my sorrows, the source of all my fears, the source of all happiness. I'll protect this mind. I'll protect it from forgetting what to adopt. I'll protect it from forgetting what to adopt, what to avoid, what to reject. What use to me are many disciplines if I can't guard and discipline my mind? All disciplines are methods to guard mind, to instill a moral conscience in your mind regarding oneself and regarding others in order to approach wisdom, in order to approach the nature of mind. All disciplines have that purpose. In Buddhism, disciplines are not rules to define Buddhism as like a religion or something. Like discipline is a expedient way to carry out an indispensable component on the path. But it is on the path, and discipline changes. It changes as we see even from say the discipline that ensures one's own liberation from suffering by regulating your life in such a way that you don't allow yourself to have the opportunity to do physical or verbal mistakes. You separate yourself in such a way from conventional society or from others, really. And then you're protected from making new karma. And then through taking refuge and developing shamatha and vipassana, then you purify mind and come to some realization of non-self nature of you as an individual. And then that discipline shifts. And then maybe the bodhisattva path, you may encounter situations, or you will encounter situations because you are participating. And when you participate in society, then different circumstances arise. And as the bodhicitta or bodhisattva path, then you respond to things in a different way, and you bend the rules, or you violate the rules, or you actually carry out completely the opposite actions because of understanding that it will benefit others. So anyway, what use are many disciplines if I can guard and discipline my mind? So now he goes back to assuring us that with mindfulness and introspection, then if I guard my mind, and then my path will be assured. The accomplishment of bodhicitta will be assured. It's through introspection and vigilant introspection and mindfulness. Vigilant introspection, introspection has that awareness or that alertness, but it also has an action. It also connotation. The word also means that you correct, you activate the mind. So now we're there. So now he's saying how we need to keep watch over the mind, and then to continue that. I think we'll end there. Okay.
All right.
Use maybe your listening skills. How we have to kind of jump start. It's kind of a lot. I realize hour and a half, and I'm just going. So a lot of this chapter will move quickly because it's very self-explanatory. What you say? It's very easy to understand. So I'll try to keep it at that. So we're going to just and maybe too much time on this, but sort of already too far along too late to stop now. Okay, so please review this chapter, these verses, and try to see a lot of the way that we read this is to understand the context of it and what Shantideva is getting at. And then also, like in the traditional classes of Bodhicharyavatara, people would read the whole book regularly, and then particularly they would read the chapter that was being discussed, and then definitely would read the first, second, and third chapters every day, and particularly the second and third chapters every day, because that's more of that. That's like I mentioned earlier. At that time, that became a ritual, a bodhisattva vow-taking ritual. So it would be. I'm not demanding, but as long as we're in this sort of program of this text, it would be good for you to put yourself under the magic of this text regularly. Well, and then we'll meet every week or every other week for the teachings. Okay, so then I'll end and we'll read the dedication of virtue.
I never got anything but audio, nothing else. I couldn't see.
Okay. All the virtue of this practice and all that is gathered throughout the 3 times, I dedicate to all beings without exception, so that they may attain Buddhahood. Following and emulating the omniscient and courageous Manjushri, and likewise Samantabhadra, I completely dedicate all virtue. Since dedicating merit is praised as supreme by victorious ones of the 3 times, I completely dedicate these roots of virtue for the sake of practicing excellent conduct. May the teachings of Lord Buddha, the only source of benefit and happiness, long remain in this world. May the lives of those who uphold the teaching be as stable as a victory banner. Supreme bodhicitta is so very precious. Where it has not yet arisen, may it arise. Where it has arisen, may it not decline, but evermore grow and flourish. Okay, so good night, be well, eat well, sleep well, get lots of good rest, practice well.